"You're no longer needed here," Principal Henderson said, his voice cold as winter morning air. He slid the termination letter across his mahogany desk like he was dealing a losing hand. "Effective immediately." Sofia Martinez stood frozen, still clutching the stack of student papers she'd been grading during her lunch break. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago, forgotten while she wrote encouraging notes on each assignment. Now her hands trembled slightly as the words sank in. Her dark eyes, the ones her students said looked like chocolate, widened in disbelief. "But the kids," she whispered, her voice catching. She thought of 23 third graders who would walk into her classroom tomorrow and find a stranger behind her desk. "The kids will be fine," Henderson interrupted, still not meeting her gaze. His eyes focused somewhere over her shoulder, on the motivational posters she'd put up with her own money. "We've found a replacement." But Sofia knew better. This wasn't about the kids. It never had been. From the moment she'd walked through Jefferson Elementary's doors 8 months ago, fresh out of her master's program, she'd felt their stares. The way conversation stopped when she entered the teacher's lounge. How her curves drew whispers instead of respect, how her youth became a weapon against her competence. "Too glamorous for a classroom," they'd muttered behind cupped hands. "What's she trying to prove with those heels?" They saw her auburn hair, her fitted dresses, her bright smile, and decided she couldn't possibly have a brain to match. Sofia had tried everything: loose clothing, minimal makeup, pulling her hair back severely. Nothing worked. Beauty, she learned, was sometimes a burden in a world that expected teachers to fade into beige backgrounds. The trouble had started 3 weeks earlier when Sofia noticed Marcus Thompson, an 8-year-old who sat in the back corner like a ghost. While other teachers had written him off as slow or behavioral problem, Sofia saw something else entirely. In his silence, she recognized the weight of secrets too heavy for young shoulders. In his withdrawn manner, she saw her own childhood self, hungry for kindness, starving for someone to notice. Marcus never raised his hand, never smiled, never spoke unless directly questioned. His clothes hung loose on his small frame, and Sofia noticed how he saved half his lunch, wrapping it carefully in napkins. When she asked why, he whispered, "For later," but she suspected later meant dinner. So Sofia began staying after school. Not for lesson planning or grading, but to sit with Marcus in the quiet classroom where afternoon sunlight painted golden squares on worn linoleum. She didn't lecture or push. She simply existed beside him, the way someone should exist beside a frightened child. Slowly, like spring arriving after harsh winter, Marcus began to open up. He told her about nights when mommy cried and daddy yelled. About bruises hidden under long sleeves. About a grandmother who lived far away but sent letters full of love. About feeling invisible, unwanted, forgotten. Sofia's heart broke and mended itself daily. She bought granola bars with her own money, kept them in her desk drawer. She purchased extra school supplies because Marcus's were always lost or forgotten. She made sure he knew that someone, at least one person in this world, thought he mattered. "Miss Martinez," other teachers would say, "you're getting too involved. There are boundaries." But Sofia would look at Marcus, really look at him, and see a child drowning while adults debated the proper way to throw a life preserver. "He needs someone," she would say simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon when the school counselor, Mrs. Peterson, walked into Sofia's classroom and gasped like she'd witnessed a crime. There sat Sofia, her manicured fingers gentle in Marcus's hair, braiding it into neat sections. "This is completely inappropriate," Peterson declared, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You're crossing professional boundaries." Sofia looked up, her hands still moving with practiced care. Marcus had asked her that morning if she could help him look nice for picture day. His mother hadn't combed his hair in weeks, and it hung in tangles that made other children laugh. How could she say no to such a simple request? He wanted to look good for his school picture, Sofia explained quietly. His grandmother is the only one who'll frame it. But explanations were wind against stone. Peterson saw only what she wanted to see, a young, beautiful teacher touching a student. Context didn't matter. Intent was irrelevant. Appearance was everything. The next morning, Sofia was summoned to the administrative office like a criminal called for sentencing. No investigation, no questions about Marcus's well-being, no inquiry into why a child needed such basic care. Just accusations wrapped in official language, inappropriate conduct, boundary violations, unprofessional behavior. As Sofia cleaned out her desk, her heels clicking against tile like a funeral march, her colleagues looked away. Some in shame, recognizing their own cowardice. Others in quiet satisfaction, the beautiful teacher was finally getting what they thought she deserved. What the school administrators didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined, was that someone had been watching. Someone who mattered more than they realized. Dorothy Williams, Marcus's grandmother, lived 3 hours away in a small town where everyone knew everyone's business. She'd been worried about her grandson for months, the way his voice grew smaller during their weekly phone calls, how he'd stopped asking when she might visit. So she'd started making the drive to Jefferson every Friday, sitting in her old Buick across from the school, watching. She'd seen teachers hurry past Marcus like he was invisible. She'd watched him eat lunch alone, his small shoulders hunched against the world's indifference. But she'd also seen something else, a young woman with kind eyes who noticed when others looked away. Dorothy had watched Sofia kneel to Marcus's level in the hallway, had seen her slip him a granola bar when she thought no one was looking. She'd witnessed their after-school sessions through the classroom window, how Sofia would sit patiently while Marcus worked through his fears one whispered word at a time. The Friday Sofia was fired, Dorothy saw her grandson standing at the school entrance, tears streaming down his face, asking every adult who passed, "Where's Miss Martinez? Where did she go?" That night, Dorothy sat at her kitchen table under the yellow glow of her banker's lamp, her arthritic hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. Writing was painful these days, but some things demanded to be said. She pulled out her best stationery, the kind saved for important occasions, and began to write. To the Jefferson Elementary School Board, her careful script began. "My name is Dorothy Williams, and I am writing about the gravest injustice I have witnessed in my 73 years. She wrote about Marcus's transformation under Sofia's care. How a child who'd been labeled difficult and slow had begun to blossom like a flower finding sunlight. How Sofia had seen past his circumstances to his potential, had fed him when he was hungry, listened when he was scared, shown him kindness when the world showed him cruelty. You fired the only teacher who cared enough to truly see my grandson," she wrote, her pen pressing firm against the paper. "You called her actions inappropriate. I call them heroic." She didn't cross professional boundaries, she crossed human ones, the ones that separate us from truly caring for one another. Dorothy sealed the letter and drove to Jefferson that very night. She hand-delivered copies to every school board member's home, ringing doorbells and looking them in the eye as she pressed the envelope into their hands. "Read this," she told each one. "And then ask yourself if you're proud of what you've done." But Dorothy didn't stop there. She called other parents, mothers and fathers who'd noticed their children's excitement about Miss Martinez's class, who'd heard stories about the teacher who made learning feel like magic. She shared her letter with the parent Facebook group, with the neighborhood association, with anyone who would listen. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Parents began sharing their own stories, how Sofia had stayed late to help their struggling readers, how she'd celebrated their children's smallest victories, how she'd made every student feel special and seen. Sarah Chen, mother of twin boys in Sofia's class, posted a photo of a handwritten note Sofia had sent home. "Tommy was so brave today, he raised his hand for the first time. I'm so proud of him, and I know you are too." What kind of teacher takes time to celebrate a shy child's courage? Sarah wrote, "The kind we just fired for caring too much." The story spread like wildfire through social media. #Justice for Sofia began trending locally, then statewide. Parents organized protests outside the school, carrying signs that read "Bring back Miss Martinez" and "Compassion isn't a crime." Local news picked up the story. The headline read, "Beloved teacher fired for caring too much." The reporter interviewed Dorothy, who spoke with the quiet authority of someone who'd lived long enough to recognize injustice when she saw it. They punished her for showing love, Dorothy said, her voice steady despite her tears. What kind of world are we building for our children when kindness is considered inappropriate? The story went viral. National news outlets picked it up. Education bloggers wrote passionate defenses of Sofia's actions. Teachers across the country shared their own stories of being told they cared too much or crossed professional boundaries by treating students like human beings. Through it all, Sofia remained silent. She spent her days at the community center, tutoring children whose parents couldn't afford private help. She avoided cameras and declined interviews, her grace under pressure only adding to her mystique. She didn't know that parents had started a petition demanding her reinstatement. She didn't know that over 50,000 people had signed it within a week. She didn't know that the school board was meeting in emergency sessions, watching their reputation crumble in real time. All she knew was that she missed her students terribly, and that somewhere in the city, a little boy named Marcus was learning that adults who care can disappear without warning. The phone call came on a rainy Thursday evening while Sofia was helping her neighbor's daughter with algebra homework. The caller ID showed Jefferson Elementary, and for a moment, Sofia's heart stopped. She almost didn't answer. The wounds were still too fresh, the betrayal too raw. "Miss Martinez?" The voice belonged to Dr. Reynolds, the superintendent. "We'd like to meet with you. Tomorrow morning, if possible." Sofia closed her eyes, listening to rain against the window. Part of her wanted to hang up, to move on with her life, to find a school that would value her heart as much as her credentials. But another part, the part that still dreamed about 23 third graders, whispered that some fights were worth having. "I'll be there," she said quietly. "But I won't be coming alone." Dorothy Williams had insisted on accompanying Sofia to the meeting. "You stood up for my grandson when no one else would," she'd said, her weathered hand squeezing Sofia's. "Now I stand up for you." They arrived at the school district office on a crisp Friday morning. Sofia wore a simple navy dress, professional but not apologetic, confident but not defiant. She'd learned that her appearance would always be scrutinized, but she refused to hide who she was to make others comfortable. The boardroom was packed. School board members sat at a long table, their faces carefully neutral. But behind them, the room was filled with parents, teachers, and community members who'd come to witness this moment of reckoning. Dr. Reynolds cleared his throat. "Miss Martinez, we've reconsidered our decision regarding your employment. We'd like to offer you full reinstatement, with back pay and a public apology." Sofia remained seated, her hands folded in her lap. Around her, people shifted expectantly, waiting for her to accept gracefully and let everyone move on. Instead, she stood slowly, her presence commanding the room's attention. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady, carrying the weight of every teacher who'd ever been told they cared too much. "I appreciate your offer," she began, "but I need to understand something first. Are you offering me my job back because you believe I was wrongly terminated, or because public pressure made it inconvenient to keep me fired?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Board members exchanged glances, suddenly fascinated by their paperwork. Dorothy Williams rose from her seat, her cane tapping against the floor. "If I may," she said, her voice carrying the authority of 7 decades. "This young woman saved my grandson. Not just his grades, his spirit. He came home telling me about the teacher who noticed him, who made him feel special, who showed him what kindness looked like." She turned to face the board members directly. "You punished her for giving a child what he desperately needed, human connection. You called it inappropriate. I call it miraculous." Applause began in the back of the room, spreading like a wave until the entire space rang with approval. Parents stood, teachers joined them, even some board members found themselves clapping. When the room quieted, Sofia spoke again. "I'll return to Jefferson Elementary, but only under certain conditions. First, we need clear guidelines about what appropriate care actually means, guidelines that don't punish teachers for showing genuine concern for their students' well-being." Dr. Reynolds nodded quickly. "Of course, we can." "Second," Sofia continued, her voice gaining strength, "I want a commitment that no teacher will ever again be fired for caring too much. We need policies that protect educators who go above and beyond for their students. Absolutely, Reynolds agreed. And third, Sofia said, her voice softening, I want Marcus Thompson to know that the adults in his life fought for him. That someone stood up and said his well-being mattered more than bureaucratic boundaries. The room erupted in applause again, but Sofia wasn't finished. I'm not just a pretty face who stumbled into teaching, she said, her words carrying years of accumulated hurt. I'm an educator with a master's degree, student teaching awards, and a heart that breaks for every child who feels invisible. My appearance doesn't make me less capable, it just makes some people uncomfortable with how much I care. Mrs. Peterson, the counselor who'd initiated Sofia's firing, stood up slowly. Her face was red, whether from shame or emotion, Sofia couldn't tell. Miss Martinez, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I owe you an apology. I was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. What you did for Marcus, it's what we should all be doing. The transformation was immediate and profound. Sofia returned to Jefferson Elementary to find her classroom decorated with welcome banners made by her students. Marcus ran to her the moment she walked through the door, wrapping his thin arms around her waist. I knew you'd come back, he whispered into her dress. Grandma Dorothy said people who really care always find a way. In the weeks that followed, something beautiful happened at Jefferson Elementary. Other teachers began staying after school with struggling students. The counselors started a program pairing volunteers with children who needed extra attention. The principal instituted care awards for staff members who went above and beyond. Sofia's story had done more than restore her job, it had reminded an entire school community what education was supposed to be about. On her classroom wall, Sofia hung a framed photo of herself and Marcus on picture day, his hair neatly braided, his smile brighter than sunshine. Beside it, she placed Dorothy's original letter to the school board, a reminder that sometimes it takes a grandmother's love to teach adults about courage. The last line of Dorothy's letter had become Sofia's motto, true beauty isn't in how we look, it's in how we love. Before we end this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and drop a heart in the comments below. Sometimes the most beautiful thing we can do is simply care, even when the world tells us we're caring too much.